If we look at our daily lives, there's a staggering amount of change going on, isn't there? Our moods change, our relationships change. Technology is constantly changing. Change can be exciting, but it can also be challenging. Whether it's a major life change or a myriad of small changes, change is constant, and it takes time and it takes energy. And sometimes we don't even know or recognize when we're in the midst of change, whether it be big or small. And so I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about the dynamics of change. The ironic thing is that we have to start at the end in order to get to the beginning, letting go of the old before we can embrace the new and some new changes. And as much as we'd like to think that we go right from the end to a new beginning, there's always this middle stage called the void. And this stage is characterized by feelings of emptiness, that sort of wandering in the wilderness feeling, what's referred to as the dark night of the soul. And then we come out of this into the new beginning. The paradox of change or transition is that often these steps, they're not clearly delineated or defined. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they reappear. We think that we might have worked through something, through some aspect of change, only to have it reappear again. And many of us don't handle endings well. They're often uncomfortable and they're accompanied by grief. We make statements like, oh, let's just forget about it and move on. And so then endings in our life become like a Pandora's box full of grief from previous endings that are often unresolved. And that leads to disenchantment and disengagement and just a feeling of confusion as we move through life's changes. We can see these stages represented over and over in the Bible. A great example of the ending stage is characterized by the biblical story of Exodus. Historically, it's the story of the tribe of the Hebraic people escaping a life of slavery in Egypt, crossing the arid wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula, and arriving eventually in the land of Canaan, or what they called the Promised Land. And you might remember that Moses came to the mountain of Horeb, and the Lord's voice came out of the burning bush, telling him that he'd been chosen to lead his people out of oppression and take them into the Promised Land. And so Moses replied in Exodus, "Who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" The modern translation being, "You have got to be kidding me. You want me to do what?" God's answer was, "I'll be with you." And upon being asked to identify himself, God said, "I am who I am." And so Moses was completely identifying with his personal self, and so he felt inadequate to the task. As he began to cultivate the awareness of the larger, all in caps, I am, he realizes that he is part of a larger reality, that God or the universe is expressing as him and through him. And in Jungian terms, Moses is moving from the personal to the transpersonal, and he realizes that all his limitations are self-imposed. And so in metaphysical terms, Egypt symbolizes the unawakened life, and the Pharaoh symbolizes the personal ego separated from an awareness of God. He agrees to let the Israelites go, and then he changes his mind and pursues them with his army. So just when we think we've let go and put the past in the past, it's chasing us in force. And it's easy to become fearful and discouraged, as did the Israelites. And so then they find themselves caught between the Egyptians and the Red Sea, metaphysically caught between memories of a past and thoughts of an uncertain future. And the solution to this is found in the story itself. Moses answers his people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And the rest is history. Moses lifts his staff, the Red Sea parts, and the children of Israel cross the sea into the Promised Land. All the Egyptians drown and the Israelites are free to pursue their destiny. There's so many great lessons in this story relative to transition and change. First, the obvious lesson in letting go of the past and stepping forward into our life. Second, having a larger awareness of the I am concept. And the third, being still and knowing. not crying out for help from something outside of us, but knowing that the Spirit of God is working through us as we call it forth. So this exodus from Egypt was a new beginning. If the Pharaoh represents our ego, then this desert or void, where we often feel vulnerable because our ego defensive has fallen away, represents this transition of change. A really important part of this Exodus story is that it wasn't in the Promised Land, but in the wilderness that the Israelites made the transition from a nomadic tribe of refugees to a nation with an identity, a covenant, and a mission. The transforming power of change lies not in the destination, but in the experience of the journey itself. We travel a lot, but how often do we really experience the actual journey? We get into our cars and we go from point A to point B, which is so much different than hiking the Camino de Santiago, for example. Khalil Gibran writes, "And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy, and you would accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your field." And so I invite you to step into the emptiness and the mystery of the void when you're in transition. Don't fill it with distraction. In order to be who we really are, we must let go of who we're not. So once the Israelites had accepted that they had escaped the Pharaoh, they were then confronted with the harsh reality of their present situation. They were in the desert. They had no food, no water. They had no idea where they were going, and they were virtually defenseless against any hostile force. So again, when we translate this to ourselves, we can see that in the ending phase, we are preoccupied with the past, with the Egyptians, so to speak, who are chasing us. Once we accept the experience of the ending and those Egyptians drowned, we now step into the wilderness or the void. And oftentimes it's in this space where we feel so lost and vulnerable. And in the story, God or Spirit guided the children of Israel through the desert, through challenges and hardships for 40 years. They found that their needs were always met, and often in new and unexpected ways. So too with us, if we listen to the voice of God that is always speaking to us. Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." And so this third phase of change is the new beginning. Joseph Campbell, that great mythologist, speaks of the mythical hero, which is that person who through extraordinary resolve is able to transcend the normal limitations of humankind and performs feats and deeds that might seem superhuman. Each of us who is dealing with change or going through a transition is a potential hero. For we are leaving the familiar and venturing into this unmapped territory or the unknown, the same desert that Moses traversed. Here we encounter and battle the dragons of self-doubt, fear, and despair. Joseph Campbell said, "It's by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." But ultimately, if we persist, we will discover this new beginning, and with it, the freedom, the power, and the heart of the journey. And so how do we navigate new beginnings? Paul says in Ephesians, "Put off your old nature, which belongs to your former manner of life, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new nature, created after the likeness of God." And so as we enter into this final phase of change, of new beginnings, how can we be empowered to create powerful lives? I believe it's through empowered choices through which we stay centered in God. Ernest Holmes said, "We cannot live a choiceless life. Every day, every moment, every second, there is a choice. If it were not so, we wouldn't be individuals. We have the right to choose what we wish to experience." The only way to realize positive change in our lives is by making new choices in our new beginnings. We make so many more choices than we probably actually even recognize. Some choices we make don't even seem like choices at all. They might be old habits or things we do so regularly over time that we just take them for granted. As a consequence, they might start to seem automatic, but really they aren't. We may tell ourselves that the choice was made long ago and it's just something on autopilot, but we pretty much always have a choice. Even when it comes to norms that feel impenetrably strong, where no choice seems to exist, there is always a choice. And so how do we keep choices from paralyzing us, and how do we move forward with choice? Well, here's a couple quick tips to help you create empowered choices. 1, be centered and just remember to breathe. Take deep, softening breaths. Spend time in meditation and stillness. Feel the power and presence of God through each and every breath. 2, heal losses, forgive mistakes, ours and others. Let go of resentments. Freeing ourselves from all these elements of the past allows us to really embrace change and allows us to just face up to any missteps and see them for what they are, a gift that opens us up to lasting, empowering change. 3, open up. Don't stay contracted. Open to the pure expression of yourself. Open up to the delight of the universe. Open up to the thousands of avenues and possibilities and help. 4, trust your intuition. When we stay connected to God, our source, through prayer and meditation, then we're more tapped into our intuition and we can trust it as a reliable source of information. 5, just choose. Make the choice. Don't fall prey to paralysis, but make the best decision and then move forward. An important thing to remember about all of this is that we're not to be concerned with the how of it. Remember what Byron Katie said, there are 3 kinds of business in this world: my business, your business, and God's business. The how is God's business. And I can tell you that when I answer these questions for myself, I can sometimes feel like Moses, completely unprepared or inadequate to move forward, to embrace the answers or to where the answers might be pointing. But our new beginnings will always have an element of choice that we make, a commitment to that choice, and a stepping boldly forth, knowing we are absolutely and completely surrounded by the universe. And so as we face change in our lives, whether large or small, we can know that there will be an ending of the old, a stepping through the wilderness into a new beginning. We can make empowered choices from a deep knowing place. And it's from here that we can move forward through change and know that we are doing so from a place of connection and oneness with God.
And take in this moment to breathe that breath of life that breathes me, that breathes all things. That living Spirit Almighty is within every bone, muscle, and sinew. I give great thanks that I am able to speak and co-create into the void, that any feeling of anxiousness, any feeling of discontent or unease can be released, is relieved. That the living Spirit Almighty, this divine energy that moves through all things all the time, in its perfection, obliterates any feeling of anxiety and any feeling of discontent. These things, discontent, cannot exist in the perfect light of the divine. I know, affirm, allow, and accept that the peace that surpasses all understanding is within and through every being. We can set down defenses and set down overthinking and relax in the knowing that this peace surrounds and envelops. I rejoice in this. I say thank you, God. I release these words into the creative law, knowing that as it has been spoken, it is absolutely done. I say, and so it is.